Single dad soldier steps in when a school bully attacks a girl unaware. She's a general's daughter. In the sterile hush of a high school hallway, the sound came like a gunshot. A body hitting the floor, books scattering across tile. A janitor dropped his mop, his boots echoing as he strode forward. He didn't know the girl's name or that her silence carried secrets powerful enough to unravel lives. He only knew she'd been shoved down and no one else moved. Follow my story to the end and comment the city you are watching from, so I can see how far this story has traveled. Daniel Cross had worked in Clear Ridge High long enough to know its rhythms, the rush of sneakers at the bell, the hush of locker doors closing, the sighs of teachers clutching thermoses of bitter coffee. But this sound was different, a thud followed by the hollow skid of binders across linoleum. He looked up from his mop. 20 feet ahead, a girl was on the ground, her backpack half open, notebooks fanned across the floor like fallen leaves. Hovering above her was a boy twice her size, broad shoulders straining under a hoodie stitched with the school mascot. He wasn't pretending it was an accident, his sneer said otherwise. 2 teachers stood by the vending machine, pretending to be absorbed in their own chatter. A cluster of students turned their backs quickly, as if silence might shield them from responsibility. The girl didn't cry, didn't scream. She simply reached for her books with slow, practiced hands, as if this wasn't the first time. Daniel dropped the mop handle with a clatter. His steps carried the weight of a man who'd walked into danger before. The boy looked up, startled at the janitor's sudden presence. "Back up," Daniel said, his voice calm but sharp as steel. The bully laughed. "What, you serious old man? I barely touched her." Daniel planted a firm hand against the boy's chest. "I said back up." The words were low, but the authority in them was carved from years far beyond this hallway. Something in his stance, the way he didn't flinch, didn't blink, made the boy hesitate. He shuffled one step back. Daniel knelt beside the girl. "You okay?" She nodded once, clutching a worn sketchbook to her chest. Her long hair fell across her face, hiding her eyes. She didn't resist as he helped her to her feet. Behind them, whispers began to ripple, carried fast through phones and murmurs. The names spread like sparks on dry brush. "That's Clara Hawthorne," someone hissed. Daniel didn't hear it, not yet. The assistant principal stormed onto the scene, clipboard in hand stress in every line of his forehead. "What's going on here?" "She was pushed," Daniel said, steady. The administrator's eyes flicked from the bully to the girl to Daniel, lingering a fraction too long on the janitor's uniform. "Mr. Cross, we appreciate your concern, but this is a school matter. We'll handle it." "I am part of the school," Daniel replied evenly. "Of course," the man said quickly, glancing at the growing crowd. "Let's not escalate things." "I didn't touch her," the boy blurted. "She tripped." Daniel's gaze fixed on him, voice like iron. "She hasn't said a word." "But you just did." Silence. The girl's knuckles whitened against her sketchbook. For a flicker of a moment she looked at Daniel, just a glance, but heavy. Not gratitude, exactly. Not trust. Recognition. Like she saw in him something no one else had offered. Then she turned and walked away. The assistant principal muttered into his walkie-talkie, herding the bully toward his office. Daniel bent to pick up his mop, the crowd dissolving into nervous whispers. As a teacher brushed past, she murmured under her breath, "Do you even know who she is?" Daniel paused. "Clara," he said, testing the name. The teacher gave him a look, half warning, half awe. "She's General Margaret Hawthorne's daughter." The words hit like cold water. That name, he knew it. Everyone in the service did. Margaret Hawthorne wasn't just a general, she was the general. A strategist whose presence had once turned the tide of negotiations overseas. Daniel stared down the now empty hallway. Clara Hawthorne was the girl he'd just lifted from the floor. Back in the janitor's closet, Daniel washed his hands slower than usual. The water scalded his skin, but he hardly noticed. His reflection in the spotted mirror looked back at him, older, rougher shadows under his eyes that had never really left since the war. He hadn't stepped in to be a hero. He did it because no one else did. Because once long ago he'd failed to act quickly enough, and a child had paid the price. That evening he stood at the stove in his small kitchen stirring a pot of macaroni, while his 10-year-old daughter Mia sprawled at the table coloring dinosaurs with wings and crowns. "Dad," she said without looking up, "can I get a pink mohawk for the talent show?" Daniel nearly dropped the spoon. "Excuse me?" She grinned, filling in the scales of a dragon, deadly serious. He shook his head, laughing under his breath. "Only if you clean your room." The house was modest, the light warm, the kind of home patched together with second-hand furniture and quiet resilience. But as Mia chattered about science projects and cafeteria food, Daniel's mind kept drifting back to that hallway, to a girl clutching a sketchbook like a shield, to a name that still carried weight in the Pentagon, General Margaret Hawthorne, and her daughter alone in the corridors of a high school, silent as a shadow. Daniel lay awake that night listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the distant bark of a neighbor's dog. He saw Clara's face every time he closed his eyes. He knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Daniel clocked in before dawn the next morning, the same as he always did. The boiler room hummed with the metallic heat of old pipes, the scent of rust and dust settling in his clothes as he poured himself a bitter cup of coffee from a machine no one else dared touch. He sat at the battered desk, the glow of the school's security monitor flickering against his tired face. Technically, the feed was reserved for security staff, but Daniel had clearance for maintenance purposes, leaky ceilings, jammed lockers, faulty wiring. Still this morning he wasn't watching for loose tiles. He was watching for her, Clara Hawthorne. On the screen she appeared like a ghost moving through the halls, shoulders hunched, footsteps light, always keeping to the edge of walls. She never lingered, never sought conversation. When classmates passed, she slipped by without a glance. At lunch, she sat at the farthest table, sketchbook clutched to her chest like armor. Daniel leaned forward, his coffee forgotten. "What are you hiding in there?" he muttered to the silent feed. The sketchbook was always there, held the same way a soldier might grip a rifle, with a mixture of fear and necessity. Not decoration, not pastime. A shield. He fast-forwarded through the footage, scanning, rewinding. Nothing dramatic, no outbursts, just a girl moving like smoke, present but untouchable. He closed the laptop and rubbed his temples. She reminded him of someone, not Mia, who was all sunshine and chatter, but someone else. Someone buried in the desert of his memory. General Margaret Hawthorne. He hadn't spoken her name in years, not since the night in that God-forsaken valley when radio silence stretched into panic and tracer fire painted the sky. He remembered the wreckage of a Humvee, smoke curling like serpents. He remembered dragging a wounded officer out from twisted metal, her blood soaking into his sleeves. He'd carried her across dunes with bullets whining past, whispering she'd make it just to keep her awake. He never knew her name until later, when rumors of her survival spread. And now, decades later, her daughter walked these halls, unseen, unheard, drawing behind walls of silence. By mid-afternoon, Daniel was restocking the mop closet near the art wing when he saw her again. Clara sat cross-legged beneath a wide window, sunlight spilling over her like paint across canvas. Her head-bent hair falling forward, pencil dancing across the sketchbook in fluid strokes. No earbuds, no phone, just the scratch of graphite in an empty hall. He froze, caught in the stillness. For a moment, he simply watched. There was something haunting about the way she poured herself into those pages like the world only made sense in charcoal and lines. Then she looked up. For the first time, their eyes met. It wasn't long, just a flicker of seconds, but there was no emptiness in it. She closed the sketchbook gently, hugging it to her chest, as always. Her face gave nothing away. No fear, no irritation, just a question she didn't voice. Daniel gave a small nod. She returned the smallest one in kind. And that could have been the end. But as she rose, her bag slipped from her shoulder, landing with a soft thud. A wallet tumbled out, half open. She lunged for it too quickly, but not before Daniel saw what lay inside. A photograph. Clara, younger by several years, maybe 9 or 10, stood beside a tall woman in full military dress. Rows of ribbons glinted across the uniform cap, tilted with precision. But it wasn't the medals that froze Daniel's breath. It was the eyes. He'd seen them once through a cracked visor under a night sky full of tracer rounds. Eyes that refused to close even as blood poured. Eyes of a soldier who had vowed not to die until her mission was complete. Margaret Hawthorne. The realization slammed into him like the kick of a rifle. This girl, silent and bent under invisible weight, was the daughter of the woman he had carried through hell itself. Before he could speak, Clara snatched the wallet up, shoved it deep into her backpack, her face composed into blank stone. Then softly, for the first time, she spoke. "Thank you for yesterday." Her voice was quiet but steady, not fragile, not weak, just deliberate. Daniel nodded once. "Anytime." She hesitated, as if there was more to say, but instead she turned and walked away, her steps fast tight, like coiled wire. Daniel remained standing in the sunlight-spilled corridor, unsettled. That night at home, the weight pressed harder. Mia sat at the kitchen table, spreading glitter across construction paper like confetti. "Dad, do you think dragons get lonely?" she asked suddenly. Daniel stirred the pot on the stove, smiling faintly. "Probably. Even dragons need friends." "Good," she said seriously. "Then I'll draw one a friend." The warmth of their home filled the room, the clink of spoons, the chatter of a child. But Daniel couldn't quiet the echo of another girl alone with her sketchbook drawing not dragons, but her own defenses. Later, when Mia was asleep with her stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm, Daniel wandered into the garage. Dust clung to the air, smelling of motor oil and old paint. On a shelf sat a duffel bag he hadn't opened in years, khaki fabric frayed at the edges. He pulled it down, sat on the workbench, and unzipped it slowly. Inside, a pair of worn combat boots, a photograph of his unit laminated against, where a dull set of dog tags, a notebook scuffed by sand, and an envelope. Still sealed, still folded. The handwriting was deliberate, clean. "To the man who saved my life." Daniel's breath caught. He hadn't been able to open it back then, not when the memories were fresh and raw. It had felt too heavy, like admitting he'd done one thing right when there were so many wrongs he carried. Now, sitting under the flickering garage light, he turned the envelope in his hands. Clara Hawthorne's face flickered in his mind, followed by the sharp gaze of her mother beneath a helmet. His chest tightened. Margaret Hawthorne had a daughter. And that daughter was walking through fire all over again, only this time the battlefield was a high school hallway, and no one else was stepping in. Daniel closed his eyes, gripping the letter. He had no idea what tomorrow would bring, but he knew one thing for certain: this wasn't over. The next morning, the halls of Clear Ridge buzzed with the same noise as always, slamming lockers, half-laughed, insults, the squeak of sneakers against polished tile. But to Daniel Cross, every sound felt sharpened. He pushed his cart, slowly, mop bucket rattling, trying to tune it out. Ahead near the art wing, sunlight spilled through tall windows and painted a golden square across the floor. Clara Hawthorne sat in the middle of it, cross-legged, her sketchbook balanced on her knees. Her pencil moved with fluid certainty, tracing lines only she could see. No earbuds, no phone, just her and the page. Daniel slowed, leaning against the cart. He hadn't planned to stop, but something about her stillness drew him in. For a girl who lived in shadows, Clara seemed at home in the light. Then suddenly she looked up. Her eyes met his, unflinching. For a moment, the world hushed, the chatter, the footsteps, the buzzing lights. Only her gaze held him. She didn't glare, didn't look away in embarrassment. Instead, she closed the sketchbook with careful precision and hugged it tight against her chest. A silent shield. Daniel gave her a small nod. She returned it barely, but enough. Then she rose to her feet. The strap of her backpack slipped from her shoulder, dropping with a dull thud. A slim wallet spilled out, flipping open just enough for Daniel to see. He froze. Inside was a photograph. A girl much younger, Clara, maybe 10, standing beside a tall woman in full army dress uniform. Rows of ribbons gleamed against her chest. Her cap tilted just so, precision in every crease. But it wasn't the medals that stopped Daniel's breath. It was her eyes. He'd seen those eyes once before through a cracked visor under the pitch-black sky of a desert battlefield tracer fire arching overhead. Eyes that refused to close even when blood ran dark and heavy. Eyes that swore she wouldn't die until the mission was done. Margaret Hawthorne. The name roared in his mind like thunder. The woman in the photo was the same officer he had pulled from the wreckage of a burning Humvee, the same soldier he had carried 2 miles through sand and smoke, the woman who had left him a letter he still hadn't opened, and now her daughter was standing before him. Before Daniel could react, Clara bent quickly, scooped up the wallet, and shoved it deep into her backpack. Her face smoothed into blank composure as if daring him to mention what he'd seen. She hesitated. Sketchbook still clutched to her chest. Then softly she spoke. "Thank you for yesterday." Her voice was quiet but clear, carrying more weight than a shout ever could. Daniel's throat tightened. "Any time." She held his gaze for a fraction longer, something unspoken hanging between them. Then she turned and walked away, her steps quick, her shoulders tense like coiled springs. Daniel stood motionless, the sunlight warming his face, but leaving his chest cold. He'd spent years trying to bury the war behind maintenance closets and cafeteria chatter. Now, all at once, the past had walked straight back into his life in the shape of a silent girl, with her mother's eyes. That night after dinner, Mia sprawled on the living room rug, crayons scattered in every direction. She hummed to herself, tongue poking out in concentration as she drew. Daniel leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "What's that supposed to be?" he asked, nodding at the mess of shapes. "A velociraptor," Mia said, matter-of-factly. She added a crown on its head. "King of the dinosaurs." Daniel chuckled. "Seems pretty serious for a king." "Not serious," she corrected. "Strong." She looked up, eyes wide. "Like you." He swallowed, suddenly unsteady. "I don't know about that kiddo." But Mia just shrugged, returning to her drawing. To her the world was simple. Kings wore crowns, dragons had friends, and her father was strong enough to make things safe. Daniel wished he believed that as much as she did. Later, when Mia was asleep with her drawings pinned proudly to her wall, Daniel sat alone in the garage. The duffel bag sat open on the bench, the envelope still untouched. "To the man who saved my life." His hand shook as he lifted it. He thought of Clara clutching her sketchbook as if it were armor. He thought of Margaret Hawthorne, her blood soaking into his uniform, whispering she couldn't die here. And he thought of himself carrying both of them, one in the past, one in the present, whether he wanted to or not. He slid the envelope back into the bag. Not yet. The next day, the walls of Clear Ridge whispered louder than usual. Clara passed through the halls unnoticed except by Daniel, who seemed to see her in every reflective surface, the way her head stayed low, the way her sketchbook never left her arms. Teachers turned their eyes elsewhere. Students smirked but kept quiet when she passed. It was the silence that gnawed at him, louder than taunts. As he wheeled his cart past the library, he caught sight of her again, sitting alone at the back table, sketching under the shadow of fluorescent light. She didn't see him, but Daniel didn't need to watch any longer. He already knew. This wasn't just a girl ignored by her peers. This was a soldier's daughter, carrying a weight she hadn't asked for. And Daniel knew that weight all too well. That evening, as the sun sank low, Daniel stood at the sink, scrubbing the last of the dishes. Outside, the street lamps blinked on, casting long shadows across the quiet neighborhood. He thought of Clara's voice, those 4 words she had given him. "Thank you for yesterday." It was the smallest of acknowledgments, but for a girl who lived in silence, it was monumental. And for Daniel Cross, it was enough to know one thing: his war wasn't finished. Not yet. By midweek, the whispers had a weight to them like fog that refused to burn off. Daniel Cross moved through the corridors with his cart, feeling eyes skim over him and then slide away. Kids glanced at Clara Hawthorne as if she were a fire alarm covered in glass, break only in an emergency, and pray it never comes. Teachers perfected a new talent, pretending not to see. In the faculty lounge, coffee hissed into a carafe that had given up on tasting like anything but metal. Ms. Clayton, the art teacher, with a stare that could slice canvases, stood by the window, flipping a key ring in her palm. "Mr. Cross," she said lightly, which meant it wasn't light at all a word. Daniel set a box of paper towels on the counter. "Sure." She kept her eyes on the parking lot. "You're making people nervous, because I picked a girl up off the floor, because you stepped in where people think you shouldn't," she said, finally looking at him. "This place runs on lanes. Teachers teach, counselors counsel, custodial cleans. And if somebody's on the ground, then you call an administrator." Her jaw tightened. "I'm not saying it's right. I'm telling you what it is." He studied her a beat. "What it is looks a lot like cowardice." She didn't flinch. "What it is looks like paychecks and donors and parents who know the superintendent's golf handicap." She rolled the keys once more and slipped them into her pocket. "You can't save kids from a system by yourself." "I'm not trying to save the system," Daniel said. "I'm trying to keep a kid from bleeding." Something in her face softened, then reset. "Just watch your step, Mr. Cross." She picked up her mug and left him alone with the coffee and the hum of the vending machine. The hallways thrummed after last bell, a loose pack of laughter and doors slamming. Daniel pushed the cart toward the gym wing where sweat and liniment lived in the air. Voices snapped around the corner near the locker room. "She thinks she's better than everyone," a boy said, the word better stretched thin with envy. "Please," another snorted. "Quiet doesn't mean special. It means weird." A third voice, lower nervous. "Do you even know who her mom is?" silence quick and sharp, like a knife laid across a throat. "Shut up, man," the first hissed. "You want your dad fired?" A laugh too loud, too late. The sour, sweet cologne of boys trying to smell like men spilled around the corner. Daniel stepped out, and the talking died in a rush. 3 football jackets squared up, then faltered when they saw it was only the janitor. "Gentlemen," Daniel said. He didn't bother with a smile. "Oh, hey, Mr. Cross," the biggest one said, posture straightening by instinct. "Clean up your bench. And mind your words." They shifted embarrassment, turning to something harder. The nervous one shot a quick glance at Daniel, and then at the others. "Yes, sir," he mumbled. The biggest boy mouthed "sir" like it was a joke, but he picked up a towel anyway. Teenage bravado had a scent too. Panic under the aftershave. As they slouched off, Daniel stood alone in the corridor, hands on the cart handle, eyes on the scuffed floor. The little exchange told him more than gossip ever could. People didn't just avoid Clara because of who she was. They avoided her because of who she was connected to. There were jobs balanced on her last name, reputations, maybe entire careers wired to the Hawthorne fuse box. A wall had been built around that girl, and the brick wasn't rumor, it was fear. The summons came in a folded slip, slipped under his closet door. "Please see Vice Principal Redmond at 3:10. The clock above the sink ticked like a metronome in a quiet room. Redmond's office smelled like citrus cleaner and new carpet. Diplomas lined one wall. A framed photo of the superintendent shaking hands with a state senator anchored the other. Redmond stood as Daniel entered, smile preassembled. "Daniel," he said, gesturing to a chair. "Thanks for coming by." Daniel remained standing. Redmond leaned on the desk with the ease of a man who had practiced empathy in a mirror. "I want to start by acknowledging the great work you do for this school. We value our team members." "Team members," Daniel repeated because it tasted like a corporate memo. "Of course." Redmond folded his hands. "But we've had some concerns. Parents, staff. There's a sense that you've been more visible lately than a custodial role requires." "Visible," Daniel said. "As in, present when a student was shoved to the floor." Redmond's smile didn't crack. "No one's questioning your heart, only the optics. We are an educational institution. Roles exist for a reason. Boundaries keep everyone safe." "Boundaries didn't keep her safe," Daniel said, hearing the steel move into his voice. "Me being there did." A faint wince touched the corner of Redmond's mouth. "Look, sometimes the best way to diffuse a situation is to make a small strategic shift." He slid a paper across the desk. "We're offering you a temporary reassignment to the elementary campus across town. Lighter load, quieter environment, just for a couple of weeks." "Reassignment," Daniel said, "not suspension." "Of course not," Redmond said quickly. "We'd never make it punitive." He lowered his voice as if they were colleagues conspiring. "This is protection, Daniel. For everyone." "For everyone," Daniel echoed and let the silence stretch. He could hear the building breathe the faint rattle of ductwork, the distant spears of laughter from a closing club meeting the world passing through moments it wouldn't ever remember. He'd learned once to read the space between words, the air where truth hides. "This isn't about a mop," he said finally. "It's about a name." Redmond's eyes flickered a tell in a poker game. "We have students from all kinds of families. Some families with stars on their shoulders," Daniel said. The smile thinned. "We do not discuss individual student backgrounds." "Except behind closed doors," Daniel said. When it's time to move problems off the board. Redmond straightened. Mr. Cross, I'm asking you to accept the reassignment. It will help everyone take a breath. What happens if I say no? Redmond's pause was surgical. Then I'm concerned the board will feel compelled to review whether Clear Ridge is the right fit for you. There it was. Not a threat, an inevitability delivered like weather. Daniel picked up the paper and didn't look at it. The fluorescent lights bleached everything into the same tired color. He thought of Mia's laugh over macaroni, of Clara's white-knuckle grip on a sketchbook. He thought of the letter still sleeping in his duffel, like a heart that refused to stop. He slid the paper back across the desk. You'll get my answer in writing. Of course, Redmond said, the relief immediate and audible. Take the evening. Rest. We're all on the same side here. Daniel left without shaking his hand. The corridor outside felt narrower than it had when he'd walked in. On his way back to the closet, he passed the east hallway, where it had started the place the body hit the floor, and time hiccuped. A freshman stared at his phone screen, bright with a group chat he couldn't tear his eyes from. Two teachers stepped aside to let a donor tour pass, tour guide voice lilting state-of-the-art facilities, as if the shine were inside the walls and not sprayed on them. Daniel ducked into the custodial room and shut the door. For a moment, he just stood there, palms on the cool metal of the sink, head bowed. He wasn't angry in the way the boys were with heat and noise. He was angry with a soldier's quiet anger that packed itself tight until it could be used. He washed his hands and watched the water run off clean spirals, turning cloudy, then clear again. In the dented locker above the sink, his lunch pail sat next to a folded photograph of Mia with missing teeth, cheeks full of summer. He touched the edge of the picture and felt the knot in his chest pull taut, then hold. He wasn't going to be moved off the board. Not this time. You can only kick a good man off his post if he agrees to walk. When he stepped back into the hall, Clara was there 15 paces away, sliding a book into her locker. She glanced up just enough to register him, and something passed between them that didn't need words, an acknowledgement, a reconnaissance report condensed to a look. Daniel tipped his chin once. She returned it and closed the locker softly, the metal catching on a burr and then settling with a sigh. The wall around her was real. He could feel it. He could also feel a fissure running through it, hairline, yes, but there. Fear built fast, but truth traveled too. Sometimes it walked on 10-year-old legs in sunflower dresses. Sometimes it carried a sketchbook. Sometimes it pushed a mop. He took hold of the cart and started forward, the wheels clicking in their familiar rhythm. War changes uniforms. The mission doesn't. Not when a kid is alone on the wrong side of a line everyone pretends not to see. The garage was dark, except for the weak bulb humming above Daniel Cross's workbench. Dust hung in the air, stirred each time he moved, as if even the ghosts wanted to watch. His duffel bag sat open before him, old khaki fabric, sagging seams frayed. Inside, relics of a life he'd locked away, boots with soles worn thin, dog tags dulled by sweat, a photo of men who'd never all come home. And the envelope, still sealed, still creased from years of being shuffled, touched, considered never opened. The handwriting was deliberate, careful, the kind of script soldiers used when they wanted to be understood, even in the dark. To the man who saved my life. Daniel held it in both hands, fingers trembling slightly despite himself. The hum of the bulb faded until all he could hear was the scratch of sand in his memory, the pop of gunfire against stone walls, the rough gasp of a woman bleeding into his arms. He remembered her face through a cracked visor, pale but defiant. Margaret Hawthorne. He closed his eyes. He'd carried her across dunes whispering promises he wasn't sure he believed. "You're going to make it. Stay awake. I've got you." Her blood had soaked into his uniform, her breath catching ragged against his chest. He hadn't asked her name. He hadn't needed to. Weeks later, a medic shoved the envelope into his hand. "She wanted you to have this," he'd said. Daniel had shoved it into the duffel and left it there, too heavy to face. He'd been haunted by all the ones he couldn't save. Reading thanks from one he had, it felt like a cruel joke. But now, knowing Clara was her daughter, that letter throbbed in his hands like a second heartbeat. His breath came out shaky. He slid a calloused finger under the flap and tore it open. Inside a single page, "To the man who saved my life," it began. "You didn't ask my name. You didn't need to. You just acted." I was fading fast, and I remember thinking, "This is it." And then you were there. You dragged me out talking the whole way, promising I'd be okay. And I believed you. They said I wouldn't walk for months. I walked in 3. They said I wouldn't serve again. I did. You didn't just save me. You gave me back the fight. Thank you." Margaret H. Daniels' throat closed. He lowered the paper to the bench, staring at the ink as if it might vanish. That was Clara's mother. The Iron Legend whispered about in command tents the general whose orders shifted the balance of entire missions. The woman he had carried across a battlefield and never thought he'd see again. And now her daughter was stumbling through the minefield of adolescence, isolated and bruised in a school too cowardly to protect her. Daniel sat back heavily, palms over his face. He wanted to laugh at the absurdity. What were the odds? The girl he had stepped in to protect yesterday was tied to the most fateful night of his service. Fate. Coincidence. He didn't care for words like that. All he knew was this: he wasn't done carrying. The next morning, the school buzzed with something sharper than gossip. It felt charged like static before a storm. Daniel noticed it in the way kids' laughter cut off too quickly, the way teachers' conversations hushed when he passed. Phones flickered with shared glances. By lunchtime, he knew why. A video. Shaky footage of Daniel standing in front of a student jaw set, arms crossed. The audio was clipped in a low growl. "You'd better watch yourself." Then the clip ended. Cut to black. It wasn't the truth. The words had been spliced from an entirely different day warning a student about a wet stairwell. But context didn't matter. The caption under the video read, "The janitor with a temper." By noon, it was everywhere. Snapchat, Instagram, even the locked Discord groups Daniel didn't pretend to understand. At 3, Vice Principal Redmond called him into his office. The video played on loop, grainy damning. "Optics are the problem," Redmond said, voice crisp. "Parents are asking questions." Daniel kept his hands on his knees, steady. "It's doctored," Redmond sighed, leaning back. "Perception becomes reality, Mr. Cross. The board is suggesting a reassignment," Daniel said flatly. "Elementary campus." Redmond's lips tightened, confirming without words. Daniel rose. "I'll give you my report by end of day." He left without slamming the door, though his jaw ached with the restraint. That evening the kitchen smelled of tomato soup and grilled cheese. Mia swung her legs at the table, telling him about the chaos of gym class and a project gone wrong. Daniel nodded at all the right moments, but the weight pressed heavy on his chest. When she was finally tucked into bed, snoring softly with her rabbit hugged tight, Daniel went back to the garage. The letter lay open on the workbench, the ink glowing faint under the bulb. Margaret Hawthorne had once believed he'd saved her life. Maybe he had. But right now he couldn't even save his own reputation. And worse, Clara was watching him stumble under a system too afraid of names, too eager to bury truth beneath politics. Daniel closed his fist around the letter. His reflection in the dusty window looked back at him, not just a janitor, not just a soldier, but a father, a man who couldn't keep walking away. He whispered to the empty garage, "Not this time." By Friday morning, the halls of Clear Ridge pulsed with rumor. Whispers ran faster than the bells sliding into corners, swelling in cafeterias. The janitor's crazy. He threatened a kid. He's getting fired. The story grew arms and legs, twisting into something feral. Daniel Cross wheeled his cart down the east hallway, feeling the stairs burn into his back. Some students smirked when he passed, others ducked their eyes. The few who knew the truth kept their mouths shut. Silence, it seemed, was the currency here. The summons came quickly. "Mr. Redmond's office again." The vice principal didn't offer a chair this time. He gestured at his monitor, the doctored video playing on repeat. Grainy image-clipped audio. Daniel's voice twisted into menace. "This is serious," Redmond said flatly. "Parents are calling. Donors are asking questions." "It's cut together," Daniel said. His voice stayed calm, steady, the same way it had been in war zones when panic made men sloppy. "That audio isn't from that day. I was warning another kid about a leaking stairwell." Redmond rubbed his temples. "You know how this looks." Daniel leaned forward just enough. "Do you know how it is?" Silence stretched thick and heavy. Redmond's jaw shifted. "Look, Daniel, you've served. I respect that. But this is a school. We deal in optics, not after-action reports. I'm asking you to step back. Effective immediately, you're suspended from this campus. Quietly. Let things settle." Daniel's chest tightened, but his face stayed carved in stone. "Suspended," he repeated. "We're not calling it that," Redmond corrected. "You'll receive pay. Just stay off-site for now. For everyone's sake. For everyone's sake." The words hit harder than bullets. Daniel rose the legs of the chair, scraping. "I've done nothing wrong." Redmond looked away first. "That doesn't always matter." That night, the janitor's closet sat empty, mop and bucket abandoned like relics. The man who usually filled the silence had been erased neatly, efficiently. But not everyone had turned their back. In the library, as Daniel replaced a ceiling tile before leaving, a voice called softly behind him. "Mr. Cross." He turned. Ms. Ramirez, the new English teacher, stood in the doorway, lanyard twisting between her fingers. She looked too young to already carry fear in her eyes. "I saw the original footage," she whispered. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "And it's fake. Stitched together. I was there that day you were cleaning up after the science fair. I heard you warn a kid about the stairwell." Her words spilled fast, like she had to get them out before courage evaporated. "Would you be willing to say that he asked?" Her hands tightened on the lanyard. "I went to Redmond already, told him I'd file a statement. He told me to think carefully, said I didn't want to make waves this early in my career." She swallowed hard. "I have student loans, Mr. Cross. No tenure. If the district blacklists me." Daniel nodded slowly. "I get it." Tears pricked her eyes. "It's not fair." "No," he said softly. "But thank you for trying." She left, shoulders hunched. Daniel watched her go, jaw clenched. Vague threats dressed as advice, he hated them. They smelled too much like the bureaucrats he'd once seen sabotage missions from safe offices. That evening the school grounds felt hollow. Daniel walked one last loop of the perimeter before turning in his keys. The air was cool, the stadium lights glowing faintly in the distance. On the bleachers sat Clara, sketchbook open on her lap, legs swinging idly into the night air. He approached slowly, stopping a few feet away. She didn't look up. "I saw the video," she said, pencil scratching against the page. "Figured you did," Daniel replied. "It's not true. I know." Her pencil stilled. "You're going to lose your job, aren't you?" "Maybe." Silence. Then she murmured, "I could say something." Daniel turned to look at her. The faint glow of the stadium caught her hair, her shoulders pulled tight. "You don't have to," he said. Her voice dropped. "But I want to." Daniel sat on the bleacher, leaving space between them. "You're a kid. This mess shouldn't sit on your shoulders." "But it does," she said simply. "It always does." He waited. "My mom's name carries a lot of weight," Clara whispered, "even when she doesn't want it to. People get scared or stupid or both." Daniel gave a faint smile. "That's true." "She doesn't even know what's happening," Clara added. "She's always away, always busy. I don't tell her anything because I don't want to be a problem." Daniel looked out over the empty field lights, humming. "You're not a problem," he said quietly. Her fingers trembled against the pencil. "Why aren't you mad at me for what? For not saying anything?" Daniel shook his head. "Because I know what it's like to be quiet, to carry more than you should." She closed the sketchbook and hugged it against her chest. "I hate that they did this to you," she whispered. Daniel stood slowly, his shadow stretching long across the grass. "I'm not finished yet," he said, and he meant it. Back at home, Mia sprawled at the table with math homework, her tongue sticking out in fierce concentration. "Do I have to simplify fractions?" she groaned. "Only if you want the universe to make sense," Daniel said with a grin. Mia narrowed her eyes. "This is math, Dad, not philosophy." He laughed, but the sound was hollow. His thoughts drifted back to Clara's words, to the way her shoulders carried a weight that wasn't hers. She'd spoken for the first time. Quiet, yes, but enough to change the air. But would it be enough to change the system? Daniel doubted it. The enemy here wasn't a single bully in a hallway. It was a network of silence built of fear and politics, and Clara was standing in the middle of it. And now, so was he. By Monday, the building had learned how to pretend again. Posters for Spirit Week covered the scuffed paint. The PA crackled with birthday announcements, and someone wheeled a cart of thumbtacked trophies past the main office like victory could disinfect a place. But the silence around Daniel Cross's name felt tighter, more practiced, the way a lie gets smoother each time it's told. Clara Hawthorne felt it before she heard it. She moved through the east hallway with her sketchbook pressed against her chest hair, tucked behind one ear so she could see trouble coming. Eyes slid off her like rain off glass. No one bumped her. No one met her gaze. It was as if the school had decided she was a rumor you could get in trouble for repeating. Third period social studies met in room 214, where Mr. Fowler kept the blinds half closed as if daylight might distract from his voice. He'd transferred in a month ago, and he paced when he spoke, carving lines between rows like he was drawing a map no one else could see. Today, the board behind him read responsibilities and roles in civic institutions. "Let's examine." Fowler said slow and urbane what happens when people act outside their official capacities. He lifted a hand like he was conducting an orchestra. Consider an employee who, however well-intentioned, intervenes in a volatile situation without proper training. A few heads turned toward the back of the room where Clara sat. She didn't move. Her pencil rested on the blank page. The paper was thick, toothy, the kind that could take pressure. Fowler smiled the way adults do when they think they're being reasonable. What are the consequences? Disruption, escalation, liability. Optics matter, especially in public institutions. The word optics clicked in Clara's skull like a lock. She pictured Daniel in the hallway, the set of his jaw, the way his hand steadied her shoulder without making a show of it. She heard the hissed laughter from the locker room days earlier, the word snitch grating across metal. She saw Mr. Redmond's door closing. Fowler continued warming to his theme. And then there's the issue of professionalism. We have channels for a reason. Chain of command maintains order. The chain in her mother's world was made of steel and oath. The chain in this room was paper and fear. At the corner of Clara's eye, Ethan Price, skinny, quiet, a boy who wore the same gray hoodie 3 times a week, glanced at her, and then down at his desk, as if the glance itself had teeth. Fowler's tone softened into a condescending kindness. It's not about the goodness of the person. We don't question that. It's about role, alignment, staying in your lane. Clara's chair scraped back before she knew she'd decided to stand. Every head turned. The blinds threw bars of shadow across her face, but her voice, when it came, was clear. You weren't there. A murmur like air pulled through a vent. Fowler stopped pacing. Excuse me, Ms. Hawthorne, she said, and for once the name didn't come out like an apology. Clara Hawthorne. Recognition zipped across the room, some kids leaning forward, others flinching back. Fowler blinked, recalibrating. All right, Miss Hawthorne. Share your perspective. You weren't there, she repeated, keeping her hands still on the sketchbook. You didn't hear the sound a body makes when it hits the floor. You didn't see the teachers look away. You didn't see the faces of the kids who decided not to get involved. Fowler recovered patient. We can acknowledge your feelings and still recognize. It isn't feelings, Clara said, not raising her voice. It's fact. I was on the ground, and the person who helped me wasn't worried about optics. He helped because it was right. A chair leg squealed somewhere in the front row. Someone coughed. Clara felt her pulse in her wrist steady as a metronome, now not racing. She thought of Daniel on the bleachers, the way he said, "I'm not finished yet." She thought of Mia's small hand curled around hers after the bell, how the 4th grader's belief in her father made the world simpler and braver. Fowler cleared his throat. Even so, there are procedures. Ethan stood up. He did it like a newborn foal testing legs, awkward and astonishing. His hoodie hung off one shoulder, and his voice cracked on the first word. I saw it, he said. No one breathed. Ethan swallowed. I was at my locker. She didn't trip. He shoved her. And Mr. Cross didn't touch the kid. He just stepped between them. He looked at Clara, then at the floor. I should have done something too. I didn't. I'm sorry. The confession knocked something loose. A girl with a braid raised her hand halfway and then just started talking. My class was in the hall. I heard the thud. It wasn't an accident. Another voice from the back. I saw the video. It's cut. My cousin does edits like that. Fowler lifted both palms the way you slow a crowd without admitting you started it. Thank you. That's enough. It's not enough, Clara said. And there was no tremble left. Not until someone says, we're wrong for letting it happen. The room went still in that dense way. Truth can make it. Fowler's mouth tightened in a way that read as adult control redirect. Close the loop. We appreciate your input. Let's return to today's lesson. But the lesson had already happened. It sat in the space between students who had been invisible 5 minutes earlier, and a girl who had discovered her voice felt less like breaking and more like building. When the bell rang, the room burst into its usual scramble zippers laughter, the thunder of teenagers trying to outrun the clock. Clara stayed a beat longer, slid her pencil behind her ear, and shut the sketchbook with the care of a ritual. Hawthorne Fowler called gently as she reached the door. A moment, she turned. He searched her face for something deference, maybe, or anger he could catalog and file. Finding neither, he settled for neutrality. Be mindful, he said. Words have consequences. So does silence, she replied and stepped into the hall. Word travels in schools the way smoke does in wind. By lunch, the story had changed shape. Clara spoke. She shut him down. Ethan backed her up. Screenshots of a scribbled transcript pinged through group chats. Someone tried to post it to a school forum. It was deleted within an hour, but by then the image had sprinted farther than anyone could catch it. Ms. Ramirez found Daniel near the loading dock where the scent of baking rolls from the cafeteria sometimes drifted like mercy. She held out her phone with trembling hands. Read this. He did. The text was a jumble, fragmented sentences, the grammar of urgency. You weren't there? He helped because it was right. Silence has consequences. He could hear Clara's voice in the negative space. She talked. Ms. Ramirez whispered. I've never heard her talk. Daniel stared at the concrete at his feet until it came into focus again. He handed the phone back. Thank you. You're suspended, she said, as if saying the word might finish doing the harm. I'm sorry. I know. He glanced at the clusters of students cutting across the courtyard like flocks, loud and careless, and suddenly maybe a little less blind. Sometimes you move the line by standing on it. That afternoon his key card wouldn't buzz him into the East Wing. The red light flickered and stayed red. He stood there a heartbeat longer than necessary and then turned away. Whatever they called it, he understood what it meant, absence as policy. On the way to the parking lot, he passed the stadium. Clara sat at the top row of the bleachers, knees up, sketchbook open wind, pulling a strand of hair across her cheek. He climbed halfway, stopped where she could choose whether to meet him. She heard you, he said. Clara's pencil kept moving, but her mouth bent into a line that wasn't quite a smile. Who? Everybody, Daniel said. But more important, your mother will. Clara's hand stilled. She glanced sideways. She doesn't come to things like this. She comes to battlefields, he said. Sometimes the battlefield is a room with bad lighting and people who don't want to look you in the eye. You think there'll be a room, she asked. There's always a room, he said. The question is, who walks into it? The wind rifled the pages, flipping back through charcoal trees and lonely benches until it reached a blank sheet. Clara pressed her palm to it, holding it open. I'm tired of being quiet, she said. I know, he said. You don't have to be. She angled the sketchbook so he could see what grew beneath her pencil. 4 figures on a field, simple lines, one tall man with a square stance, a girl with a bun and a heavy book, a smaller kid with wild hair and a sun for a face, and a woman whose shoulders were straight even when she was sitting down. The woman's hands rested on her knees as if ready to push up and move the second someone needed her. Clara didn't look at him when she said, She'll come if I ask. Daniel swallowed. Ask. When he reached his truck, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He let it ring once, twice, then answered. Mr. Cross. The voice was even low, built on habits of command. "This is Colonel Kyle Morgan. We're hosting a ceremony Saturday for the unit's fallen. I'm told you're in the area. I'd like you there." Daniel stared at the horizon where the school cut a square out of the sky. "Colonel," he said slowly, "it's been a long time." "Too long," Morgan replied. "Also, General Hawthorne will be speaking." In the cab, the letter he'd finally opened lay folded in the glove box like a stored breath. Daniel closed his eyes, saw sand smoke the weight of a body he refused to put down. Then, just as clearly, he saw a girl on a bleacher with wind in her hair and a voice that had decided to live. "Send me the address," he said. He put the truck in gear. The campus slid behind him, in the rear-view bricks banners, the field where kids learned to run and to hide. Ahead, the road straightened, and somewhere past the next light, a podium waited in a room too bright and too small for everything it needed to hold. Saturday morning dawned gray, the kind of sky that felt undecided rain, maybe sun, maybe the world holding its breath. Daniel Cross shaved with steady strokes, put on the only collared shirt he owned that still pressed flat, and polished boots that hadn't touched polish in years. Mia sat on the kitchen counter, swinging her legs, hair in wild braids she'd insisted on doing herself. "Where are you going, Dad?" she asked, chewing on the edge of a piece of toast. "Just a gathering," he said, tucking the letter from Margaret Hawthorne into his wallet, as if it might steady him. "School." He shook his head. "Something older." She tilted her head. "Army stuff." Daniel smiled faintly. "Yeah, Army stuff." He kissed her forehead, promised he'd be home before dinner, and drove north with the radio off the silence of the road, stretching longer than any convoy he'd ever ridden. The Civic Center was a squat building draped with flags, rows of folding chairs, already filled with gray heads, stiff shoulders, and medals polished within an inch of their lives. Old friends slapped back, some laughing too loudly, others lingering in silence. Daniel kept to the back row, hands folded, eyes on the stage. Colonel Kyle Morgan spotted him anyway. The man had thickened with age, but carried the same granite steadiness. He walked straight up the aisle, clasped Daniel's hand in both of his. "Good to see you, Cross. Thought you'd disappeared off the map." Daniel shrugged. "Been busy with mop buckets." Morgan chuckled once, then sobered. "Glad you came. It matters." Daniel nodded. He wasn't sure what mattered anymore, but he knew Morgan was right. The ceremony began. A chaplain read names, voices cracked on syllables that felt like folded flags. Senators gave speeches salted with words like honor and sacrifice. Daniel let the words wash over him, heavy but distant. Then the announcer paused. "And now a few words from General Margaret Hawthorne." Daniel's chest clenched. She stepped onto the stage in full dress uniform, every line precise silver at her temples catching the light. The room hushed in the way men hush when they see a figure who's already walked through fire and returned. She didn't go to the podium. Instead, she stood at the edge of the stage, close to the front row. "I'm not here because of rank," she began, voice deep, commanding, yet human. "I'm here because I'm alive, and I shouldn't be." Daniel's hands tightened against his knees. She scanned the audience. "Years ago in a valley none of us care to remember, I was pinned under wreckage, bleeding out. I had said goodbye in my head, but someone came anyway. He didn't know my name, didn't wait for orders. He carried me through smoke and fire." A ripple moved through the crowd, heads nodding, some whispering. "I never knew who he was," Hawthorne said, her voice softening. "I left a letter. Never heard back. I thought maybe it didn't matter." She paused, breath visible. "Until last week, when my daughter told me someone had stepped in to help her when no one else would. And I knew." Her eyes swept the room and locked on him. Daniel's pulse hammered. He stood before he realized he'd moved. Margaret's lips curved, half smile, half recognition. "It's you." Daniel inclined his head. "Didn't think I'd ever see you again. I didn't think I'd get the chance." The silence thickened, old soldiers and ghosts bearing witness. "You saved me once," she said, voice trembling just enough to make the room lean closer. "And now I know you saved my daughter, too." Daniel's throat worked. He looked away a moment, trying to steady himself. "I didn't even know she was yours." "Doesn't matter," she said. "You knew she mattered." The room broke into murmurs, but Daniel barely heard them. For a long moment they just stood like that. Two people bound by blood spilled years ago now, tied again by a girl holding a sketchbook in a silent hallway. After the ceremony, Daniel found himself outside in the crisp air, the flag above the building tugging against its pole. Margaret joined him, her cap tucked under her arm, now posture less rigid. "You never reached out," she said quietly. "I didn't think I had anything left to offer," Daniel admitted. Came back a shadow. "Funny," she said, glancing at him. "That shadow carried me when I couldn't walk." He gave a dry laugh. "Turns out I'm not done carrying." Her eyes dimmed. "How's she doing?" Daniel didn't ask who. "Brave," he said simply. "Braver than most adults I've met. But she's been fighting alone too long." Margaret's gaze faltered, the weight of motherhood pressing heavier than any bars of rank. "I thought I was protecting her by keeping her quiet." Turns out silence was just another battlefield. Daniel nodded. "It always is." She faced him fully. "Let me make this right. You don't owe me. I'm not talking about you," she said. "I'm talking about Clara." Daniel smiled faintly. "Then you already know what to do." That night, Daniel drove home with the window cracked. The folded letter sat on the seat beside him. Warren finally answered. For the first time in years, the road ahead didn't feel so heavy. But when he pulled into his driveway, headlights caught a scrawl across the side of his mailbox. Black spray paint dripping raw. "Snitch lover." Daniel killed the engine. The night pressed close, crickets chirping as if nothing had changed. He stared at the word until the letters blurred. Then he reached into the cab, pulled out a rag, and began scrubbing. Some battles never ended. They just changed weapons. Sunday broke, sharp and clear sunlight bouncing off the dew-slick grass outside Daniel's modest house. He was halfway through fixing a loose hinge on the front porch when the sound of tires crunching gravel made him pause. A black SUV rolled up slow-tinted windows, hiding whoever sat inside. For a split second, the old instincts surged, muscles tensed, heartbeat quickened. Combat zones had taught him one truth: vehicles like that rarely came bearing good news. The door opened. Out stepped Margaret Hawthorne. No uniform this time, just a navy jacket and jeans. The general, stripped of ceremony, looked almost human, though the weight of command never fully left her shoulders. "Morning Cross," she said. Daniel set down the screwdriver. "You've got the wrong address if you're looking for salutes." A corner of her mouth twitched. "Not today. Mind if I come in?" Daniel hesitated, then nodded toward the porch swing. "Out here's fine. My kid's inside doing homework. She doesn't need more surprises." Margaret sat hands folded, gaze steady. "I've made mistakes," she said. "On battlefields. At home. But I don't intend to make another by ignoring what's happening to my daughter and to you." Daniel leaned against the railing, arms crossed. "It's not me you should worry about. I've been chewed up by worse." "But she hasn't." Margaret countered. "Clara's tougher than she looks, but no child should have to walk into a war zone disguised as a school hallway." The words landed hard. Daniel had seen the bruises Clara tried to hide under sleeves the way she walked faster past certain lockers. He said nothing. Margaret studied him. "She trusts you." "Kids see through things," Daniel admitted. "They know who's bluffing." "Then let's stop bluffing," Margaret said. "I'm done letting administrators sweep this under a rug. I'm done letting men like Redmond trade justice for convenience." Daniel arched a brow. "And what exactly are you planning to do? Flash your stars until they blink?" Margaret's eyes narrowed. "You think I built a career on ceremony? I built it on holding people accountable. That doesn't stop because the battlefield changed zip codes." Silence stretched between them. Birds chattered in the maple tree overhead. Daniel finally exhaled slow. "So, what do you need from me?" "Truth," Margaret said. Every detail, every threat, every time Clara flinched. Daniel's jaw tightened. "That'll take a while." "I've got time," she replied. By afternoon, the two of them sat at his kitchen table. Mia brought cookies store-bought but offered with pride and eyed the general with curiosity. Margaret thanked her softly before turning back to Daniel. They went over it all, the shove in the hallway, the fake video, the silent teachers, Redmond's ultimatum. Margaret's expression didn't change much, but her knuckles whitened around her coffee cup. When Daniel finished, she said only, "Cowards. Every one of them." "Fear's contagious," Daniel said. "So is courage," she replied. The next day, Clear Ridge High buzzed with nervous energy. Word had spread that the general herself was coming. Staff straightened ties, students whispered. Redmond paced his office. When Margaret Hawthorne strode through the front doors, she didn't pause. Her boots clicked against tile like gunfire in a silent street. Daniel walked beside her, not in uniform but carrying the same weight. Clara trailed behind, sketchbook clutched tight, chin lifted higher than usual. They didn't wait to be called in. Margaret opened Redmond's office door without knocking. He shot to his feet. "General Hawthorne." "I sit down," she ordered. The man sat. She laid a folder on his desk with the precision of placing explosives. "You've allowed a culture of intimidation under your roof. You've let my daughter be tormented, and when someone finally stood up, you tried to bury him." Redmond stammered. "Ma'am, with respect, there were optics donors." "Children are not optics," Margaret snapped. "They are lives. And when you chose convenience over them, you failed as an educator. You failed as a man." Redmond's face drained pale. I was under pressure." "You don't know pressure," she said, voice dropping to a dangerous calm. "Pressure is dragging your brothers through mortar fire while bullets stitch the ground around you. Pressure is watching a soldier bleed out and knowing you can't save him. What you faced was cowardice dressed as politics." The room quivered with silence. Daniel stood in the corner, arms folded. He didn't need to say anything. The storm was already here. Finally, Margaret leaned forward. "Effective immediately, you will resign." "Quietly, if you prefer. Publicly, if you force me." Redmond's mouth opened and closed. He looked at Daniel, then at Clara, then at the general. Something inside him collapsed. He nodded. Margaret straightened. "Good. Perhaps next time you'll remember that children deserve guardians, not bureaucrats." She turned on her heel and left Clara at her side. Daniel followed, leaving Redmond staring at the wreckage of his career. Outside, Clara slipped her hand into her mother's. For the first time in months, her shoulders loosened. Margaret squeezed back, then looked at Daniel. "Thank you," she said simply. Daniel gave a faint shrug. "Didn't do it for thanks." "I know," Margaret replied. That's why it matters. The three of them stood in the sunlight, a soldier, a general, and a girl finally free of silence. But the battle wasn't over. It had only shifted ground. Because bullies don't vanish when authority changes. They adapt. And somewhere in the restless crowd of students watching from the windows, a pair of eyes burned with anger, already planning the next strike. They didn't celebrate in the parking lot. No one threw caps or clapped him on the back. After Redmond's resignation, after the doors closed and the building swallowed its own noise, the three of them, Daniel, Margaret, and Clara, stood a moment in the thin noon light, as if waiting to see whether the ground would tilt. It didn't. Cars hissed past on wet asphalt. A bell rang somewhere inside, and students poured into hallways that pretended nothing had happened. By late afternoon, the sky had settled into a soft, steady rain. The coffee shop on Cedar was mostly empty, a tin roof, ticking under the downpour, steam fogging the front windows. Daniel took a table near the glass, the kind where you could watch traffic blur into streaks. He held his paper cup the way a man holds a compass he's used too long to mistrust. When the bell over the door chimed, Margaret Hawthorne stepped in without a uniform to brace her. Jeans, a slate sweater, hair pulled back. She looked younger like that, and also more tired. She spotted him and crossed the floor with the efficient grace of someone who'd done too much marching to waste steps. "You pick good meeting places," she said, setting her phone face down as if permission for the world to wait. "Rain helps," Daniel said. "Makes everything honest." A crooked smile, or at least quiet. They didn't rush. He asked if she wanted sugar. She said yes, then changed her mind and drank it black. He watched her wince, then pretend not to. The tiny theater of it made them both relax. "Clara?" he asked. At Ms. Clayton's room, she said, "Ramirez is with her too. Two of the brave ones, apparently. Clayton warned me off," he said. "She warned me off too," Margaret replied. 5 years ago, different school, same look. People like her are brave until the day they're asked to risk their pension. They let that sit. Water beaded on the window and ran down in crooked lanes. "I should have known sooner," Margaret said, finally, voice lower. All the signs were there. The silence, the drawings, the way she'd tuck herself into the corners of rooms like furniture. She traced a circle on the lid with one finger. "I thought if I kept her invisible, the world would pass by without taking aim." And it did, Daniel said, until it didn't. Margaret nodded once. "I moved us every year, kept her off teams, off stages, off anything where a camera might hold on her face. Command teaches you to plan for worst cases. Motherhood turned every Tuesday into one." Daniel's eyes stayed on the rain. "We both built walls we thought were shields." She studied him. "What did yours keep out?" He let the question roll around before answering. "A boy," he said quietly. 11. We were moving a village under pressure. I called an all-clear too fast. He stepped forward when I shouldn't have let anyone move. He cleared his throat, the sound small in the big room. Every time I picked up a spoon to make Mia breakfast that first year back, it felt like I was picking up that moment again. Margaret didn't say it wasn't his fault. She didn't offer a slogan about war. She leaned in a fraction. "You carried me," she said, simple as a first fact. "You carried my daughter, different battlefield, same weight. And today you stood in a room and didn't flinch. That doesn't erase anything, Daniel. It does mean you aren't the man your guilt says you are." He gave a short laugh that wasn't quite a laugh. "You give good speeches." "I gave them for years," she said, to rooms that stopped listening the second the cameras turned off. She slid a folded document across the table. heavy paper embossed seal at the top. The Army crest glinted like something dug up and polished. This one isn't a speech. He didn't touch it immediately. What am I looking at? Correction, she said. The district won't fix its own mistakes without pressure. That letter applies it. It's a formal recommendation to reinstate you with commendation. I've cited 2 incidents of decisive action in defense of students and staff. I've added my personal history with you because hiding it serves no one now. He picked it up, the paper almost warm from her hands. His name printed in clean type. Words like integrity and courage and sustained service that made his mouth dry. Beneath them, a signature, General Margaret E. Hawthorne. The ink had cut deep into the fibers. No room for doubt. I don't want favors, he said, but the protest had no edge. This isn't a favor, she said. It's me finally using the power I spent a career accumulating for the thing that matters most. Her jaw tightened. I won't lose another battle because I'm afraid someone will accuse me of throwing my weight around. You're going to the board, he said, hearing the future. They've scheduled a community forum for Tuesday. Her eyes held his. You'll be there. He nodded. I will. Say as little as possible, she added. Let me do the rest. He folded the letter carefully and slid it into his jacket pocket as if it were fragile. A silence opened, less heavy, now more like a breathing space. I need to tell you something else, Margaret said, fingers tightening around the cup lid. The ceremony yesterday. Morgan didn't find you by accident. Daniel looked up. I called him, she said. I wanted to know. I needed to confirm what I already suspected, that the man my daughter kept mentioning was the one who carried me out of fire. I'm sorry if that feels like manipulation. I can't stop being a strategist overnight. He thought about the room full of names, the flag, the way her voice had found him from a stage. I'm grateful you did, he said. I don't know that I'd have walked into this without something to hold. She nodded, relief loosening the set of her shoulders. Good. Then we're aligned. Outside, a pair of high schoolers sprinted under one jacket, shrieking when a taxi splashed their ankles. The coffee shop door breathed out the smell of rain and hot bread when someone left, then shut again with a soft clap. Clara told me she's tired of being quiet, Daniel said. Good, Margaret answered. She'll need that voice Tuesday. A beat. So will Mia. If her mother were here, I'd ask permission. Since she's not, I'm asking. Would you let your daughter speak if she wants Daniel's throat worked? She'll want, he said. She thinks essays about heroes are a civic duty. Then we'll clear a path, Margaret said. They sat with that a plan that sounded almost like hope. He noticed not for the first time that her hands were steady even when the rest of her was tired. She noticed not for the first time that his eyes scanned exits out of habit and then returned to her face, present on purpose. Do you write? She asked suddenly. The question surprised him. Sometimes. Late. Letters I don't send. To who? Depends on the night, he said. Men who didn't come home. Mia, 20 years from now. A job application I never mail. He smiled, embarrassed. You? Me. I wrote you back once, he admitted. In my head. The words sounded better there than they would have on paper. She reached into her purse and pulled out a thin blue folder. Inside, a single sheet of stationery blank. She slid it toward him with a pen. Write one I can read. He stared at the page. The rain adjusted its tempo on the roof. Somewhere behind the counter, a milk frother hissed like a small storm. You don't have to fill it, she said. Sometimes one sentence is the truth. He bent and wrote, I didn't open your letter because I didn't think I deserved anything good. Today, I am trying to." He capped the pen, surprised at the sudden sting behind his eyes. Margaret didn't rush to read it. She folded the page and tucked it into the blue folder like something you deliver in stages. "Thank you," she said simply. He exhaled. "You sure you want to drag the Pentagon into a school board squabble?" "I'm not dragging anyone," she said, rising. "I'm showing up. Tuesday, 6 o'clock. She slipped into her jacket and paused. "Don't rehearse. Just tell the truth. It's the only thing that survives microphones." At the door she stopped, then looked back and gave him something closer to a smile than anything he'd seen from her yet. "For what it's worth, Cross," she said softly, "whatever room you walk into feels less dangerous." "Same goes," he said. She stepped into the rain without opening an umbrella, head lifted as if to test the weather herself. He watched her cross to her car, then glanced at the empty chair she'd left and the letter settling warm against his chest. When he finally stood, the bell over the door chimed again. The street smelled like wet pavement and fresh leaves. Somewhere to the south, a school auditorium was being prepared, microphones checked, folding chairs set in tight rows, a sign taped crookedly above a stage that would promise community and deliver proof. On Tuesday night, the room would be too bright and too small, and still he'd walk into it. The folding chairs creaked like nervous voices. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, flooding the high school auditorium with a brightness that made every shadow vanish. Parents shifted in their seats, whispering behind programs, the air thick with the mix of wet coats and starch from the cafeteria down the hall. At the front, a long table draped in blue cloth bore a crooked placard, "School Board Forum Community Concerns." Daniel stood near the entrance with Mia's small hand wrapped around his. She squeezed once, steadying him. For all the days he had taught her how to be brave, reading speeches in the living room, keeping her chin level when classmates laughed at her thrift store shoes tonight, she was the one teaching him. "You don't have to say much," she whispered. "Ms. Ramirez said truth works better when it's shorter." He smiled down at her. "Since when are you taking advice from your teachers? Since one of them finally got brave?" Mia answered matter-of-fact. Clara sat 2 rows ahead, sketchbook shut for once, back straight, as if the chair itself had called her to attention. She wore no armor, but her silence, and tonight she had promised to break it. Daniel felt the knot in his chest tighten. He'd fought in valleys under mortar fire. He'd stood before commanding officers who could end his career with one sentence. But this crowd of parents and board members with their ballpoint pens felt like the most dangerous battlefield of all. The gavel rapped. "This forum is now in session," announced Chairwoman Dobbins, a woman whose hair sprayed high as her voice. "Our first order of business review of staff conduct concerning Mr. Daniel Cross, employed in custodial services." Murmurs swelled. Some faces held sympathy, others suspicion. Daniel caught snippets. "That's the guy from the video. He scared the boys. My son says he stepped in like a drill sergeant." He sat when called the blue-clothed table, stretching wide between him and the 5 board members, his palms pressed flat to the wood as if anchoring himself to something real. Chairwoman Dobbins adjusted her glasses. "Mr. Cross, the allegations are serious. Intimidating behavior toward students, overstepping duties, causing unnecessary disruption. You may speak." His throat tightened, words clinging like sandbags. He remembered Margaret's advice, say as little as possible. Tell the truth. He leaned toward the mic, voice steady, though his pulse thudded in his ears. "A girl was on the floor," he said. "A boy had shoved her. I asked him to stop. That's all." Some parents clapped politely, others frowned. A man in a business suit muttered, "Ex-military types can't adjust." Before the board could respond, a small voice piped from the audience, "That girl was me." All heads turned. Clara rose, her hands trembling but her eyes fierce. For a moment she looked every bit her mother's daughter. Shoulders squared, silence burning into sound. "My name is Clara Hawthorne," she said loud enough for the cheap microphones to catch. Gasps rippled. The surname carried weight. A few parents stiffened, recognizing it instantly. "I didn't ask Mr. Cross to help me," she continued, "but he did. Because nobody else would. Not teachers, not classmates, no one. Everyone watched me get hurt, and they looked away. He didn't. He's the reason I'm standing here instead of hiding in the library again." Her voice broke, but she steadied it, biting down like a soldier on a strap. "If you punish him, you punish me too. And you tell every kid here that silence is the right choice." The room shuddered with divided applause, some parents clapping, some staring stony-faced. Dobbins tapped her gavel sharply. "Order! We will have order!" Daniel sat frozen. He hadn't expected Clara to speak like that, to shatter years of quiet in one burst. He wanted to rise to thank her, but before he could, another chair scraped loudly. Mia climbed onto her seat, then stepped down the row to the aisle. Her curls bounced her dress too big for her thin frame, but her voice carried. "My name's Mia Cross. He's my dad. He reads me stories every night, and he makes pancakes even when he's tired. If he's scary, then I guess bedtime stories are scary. If he's dangerous, then I guess pancakes are dangerous." Laughter broke through the tension, a wave of release. "And if you fire him," Mia added, "then you'll have to tell me why it's wrong for dads to protect kids who aren't their own." The board shifted uneasily. Parents whispered louder. Daniel felt tears rise, uninvited pride swelling like it hadn't in years. Then the back doors opened. The click of heels echoed down the aisle, crisp and deliberate. Conversation died. General Margaret Hawthorne entered in full-dress uniform, ribbons, glinting cap tucked under one arm. She didn't hurry. She didn't need to. The room rearranged itself around her. She walked straight to the front, heels striking the linoleum like punctuation. Without waiting for permission, she took the microphone from the table. "My daughter has spoken," she began, voice like steel wrapped in velvet. "Now it's my turn." No one interrupted. "Mr. Cross is not a janitor who forgot his place," she said. "He is a soldier who carried me through gunfire in Kandahar. I would not be standing here if not for him. I owe him my life, and yesterday he gave me something greater. He protected my child when others hesitated." The board stared, mouths parted. Margaret leaned in her gaze, sweeping the crowd. "If you call that intimidation, then I suggest you redefine courage. If you call it disruption, then perhaps you need more disruption in your halls." The applause this time thundered, shaking the room. Parents stood. Even those who had whispered doubt now clapped to shield themselves from her stare. Clara's cheeks were wet, but she was smiling through it. Mia clapped so hard, her palms reddened. Daniel sat unable to move, every scar of his past suddenly lighter beneath the roar. Chairwoman Dobbins cleared her throat, her gavel powerless against the tide. "The board will take this under advisement." "No," Margaret said sharply, cutting her off. "You will reinstate him, tonight, with commendation." Dobbins faltered, looked at her colleagues, then finally nodded, voice thin. "The motion passes. Mr. Cross is reinstated." The crowd erupted again. Margaret set the mic down like a gavel of her own, then turned to Daniel. Their eyes locked. No words were needed. For the first time in years, Daniel Cross felt like he belonged in the light. The night air outside the auditorium felt cool against flushed cheeks. Parents spilled into the parking lot, still buzzing, some swapping praise, others muttering about politics, but the tide had already turned. The truth was out, and it carried more weight than any whisper campaign ever could. Daniel stood at the steps, his daughter's hand in one of his Clara's small frame, leaning against his other side. Margaret walked beside them, uniform still sharp under the glow of the sodium lights. For a moment, they looked like a family, strange, mismatched, but bound by something fiercer than appearances. Mia tilted her head back toward the sky. "Dad," she whispered, "you're a hero again." Daniel squeezed her hand, voice low. "No, kiddo. Just a dad who couldn't keep quiet." Margaret looked at him. "You should let her believe both." He almost laughed. "Coming from you, that's rich." Her smile was faint, almost reluctant, but it softened the hard lines that command had etched into her face. "I spent years thinking strength was about rank medals command. Tonight I watched two children show me it's something simpler, standing up when it matters, that's all." Clara leaned into her mother, her voice small. "Does this mean it's over?" Margaret crouched, pressing a kiss to her daughter's temple. "It means the worst of it is, but people will still talk, and some will still sneer. Let them. We don't hide anymore." Daniel glanced at her. "And if the bullies try again," Margaret straightened, "then they'll find they're not just facing a general's daughter, they're facing her family." The word lingered in the air. Family. Daniel felt something in his chest ease the tight coil that had been wound since his first deployment, finally letting go. Weeks later, the rhythm of life found its new beat. Daniel's job carried on, but now when he walked the halls, teachers nodded with respect, and students parted in the hallway, some whispering, some smiling. He wasn't invisible anymore, not because of fear, but because of what he had proven. Clara joined the art club, her sketchbook finally open where others could see. The bruises faded. The silence, too. Sometimes Daniel would catch her drawing in the courtyard sunlight on her face and wonder how something so fragile had survived so much. Mia flourished too proud in the way only children could be. She told anyone who would listen that her dad fought bad guys in Afghanistan and bad bullies in the cafeteria. Daniel pretended to groan, but he never stopped her. Let the world know. As for Margaret, she surprised them all. Some evening she traded her uniform for jeans, sitting at Daniel's kitchen table, while Mia quizzed Clara on vocabulary words. Sometimes she even laughed. Slowly, carefully, the iron wall around her began to bend. One crisp Saturday, the four of them stood on the football field for a school ceremony. The stands were filled not with whispers, but with applause. Daniel had been asked to raise the flag, and for the first time in years, he accepted. His hands didn't tremble as he pulled the rope, the fabric climbing into the clear morning sky. Beside him, Clara held the base of the pole, her sketchbook tucked under her arm. Mia saluted, awkward, but sincere. Margaret stood behind them, her eyes bright with something more than pride. When the flag reached its peak, the breeze caught it, snapping loud against the silence. Daniel stepped back, watching it ripple. For a moment, he wasn't a janitor or a soldier or a man weighed down by ghosts. He was just a father, one who had found something worth standing for again. Clara whispered, barely audible, but he caught it. "Thank you." Daniel turned his voice rough. "Any time, kid." And in that sunlight, with a general's salute echoing beside him, and two children smiling up with unshakable faith, he realized the war he had fought the hardest wasn't overseas. It was here, in classrooms, in homes, in the quiet corners where injustice liked to hide. And for once he had won, because heroes don't always wear medals. Sometimes they carry mops, sometimes they carry scars, and sometimes, if they're lucky, they carry the trust of a child who finally learns she isn't alone. Your thoughts will help us create meaningful stories. And if you want to hear more powerful healing stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the bell icon so you don't miss any new episodes. And most importantly, share this video with people who need a little hope today. Thank you so much for your time. We hear you, we listen to you, and we are honored to tell these stories for you.